Uh-huh. And first of all, I'm very grateful for the invitation and for the opportunity to share the results of my study. I'm a social philosopher, and I have been studying internal displacement in Ukraine since 2014. And every time when I'm asked about internal displacement in Ukraine, about migration processes in Ukraine, I ask which one, because internal displacement and the group of internally displaced persons in Ukraine is not homogeneous. There are situations of primary, secondary, protracted displacement, and even secondary displacement after uh, full integration, and internal displacement after being a refugee abroad. So the field is really complicated. And today I'd like to share my results on the problem. Really quite simple visibility test in Ukraine. You may ask any Ukrainian which day of war it is now, and you could hear one of two answers. One answer will be, for instance, 1072nd day, and another answer might be something like 4023rd day of war. What is the reason and what is the problem here? The problem is that the war has been subdivided into two different phases, and the internal displacement during the first phase, a hybrid one, um, has some particular features, and a bit later I'll tell about them. And this displacement is a protracted one. It lasts for more. It's been lasting for more than 10 years. And the second case of displacement is a displacement that started in 2022 with the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. And the particularities of this situation differ very much from the first phase. So that's the first remark. Another important remark before I start my presentation is the internally the status, the position of an internally displaced person is not terminologically clear, because in migration studies, um, IDP, internally displaced person, is outside the migrant citizen opposition, being both. And therefore, when we speak of visibility, we should take into account that the very position of being an internally displaced person merges with the problematics of being a migrantized citizen. And that's a complicated situation as it is. As for visibility, my initial remark will be that there are three main types of visibility. Uh, for instance, Andrea Briganti suggests a social type of visibility as the recognition, media type of visibility as the flash halo effect that can be created in media, in other narratives as well, and control type visibility when we speak of inspections, regulations, some legislative aspects that can influence visibility, mark or unmarked populations and groups. And sometimes we speak of control type of visibility as the optics of power as well. Therefore, I'd like to speak of some limitations of the study. First of all, despite the vast field of internal displacement in Ukraine, I think that internal displacement from Crimea at the beginning of the war is beyond the scope of the study because despite the wave from the occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk regions in 2014 and up to 2021, and the internal displacement from other regions of Ukraine due to full-scale invasion, the displacement from Crimea has very particular format. It was not accompanied with armed combat, and it's not in the scope of the study. Then the media type of visibility, I think should also be omitted from the study and the presentation because it's a particular topic. Then some data that I'll suggest within my study are limited as well because there are certain gaps in data access in the occupied territories, and in fact we have no information about migration processes in the occupied territories at the moment. Well, you in the slide you can see more information on the restrictions, some on the restrictions and problems that should be overcome when dealing with limited data in the occupied, for instance, in the occupied territories. I'd like to show you the situation of the internal displacement before the full-scale invasion, and I'd like to draw your attention to several important points of the graph. The first point is an extreme of 2016, when the number of internally displaced persons reached almost 1,800,000 persons. And the other point I'd like to draw your attention to is the point of 2021, when the situation mostly stabilized and reached 1.5 million persons of internally displaced persons. Then just to give you some context, the next information is dated April 2022. It's the very beginning of the full-scale invasion. As you can see here, the information about the previous internal displacement and the current internal displacement merged, and at that moment, statistically, it became the situation of the new investigation of internal displacement. I'd like to draw your attention that in the report of the International Organization for Migration in April 2022, it's marked as round 2. And the first and round 1 was in March 2022, and it created a certain paradox because it meant the beginning of some displacement process, but in fact, as you remember, before that date, there were 1.5 million IDPs in Ukraine. Another information, another statistic a screenshot for context is a fresh one. It's dated, it's January 2025, and you can see that at the moment, currently in Ukraine, the number of returnees, so persons who were in internal displacement but returned to their places of former places of residence, um, is the number is larger than the number of IDPs. Just to compare, statistically, during the first wave up to 2021, returnees were about 20% of internally displaced population. And now, as you can see, their number is larger. Another initial remark is on some milestones of the presentation. I think that to combine visibility and migration studies in one topic, we'll have to look at three main milestones. So some mobility characteristics in Ukraine, stability of situation, and its influence on the larger picture, so influence on the processes in general. And here you can see some of the terms, some of the notions that would be in my presentation a bit later. As for the methodological grounds, it's a complicated question and situation because of limited data access and the initial position of the research that the data will be incomplete. But I think that it's possible to apply some methodology like causal layered analysis here, and out of four dimensions of causal layered analysis, litany, systemic causes, worldview, and myth metaphor, I think that internal displacement can be viewed from systemic causes and myth. And it makes it possible to combine social, philosophical, and purely sociological data in one study. Another methodological aspect is the discourse aspect. For instance, in CLA, in causal layered analysis, there is a point of migration that reads that migration and further adaptation is like switching from fight or flight mode to the mode of creating a new story. And discourse approach can be quite useful here. At the same time, discourse principle, as suggested, for instance, as suggested by Habermas, is on equality as well. And the study of internal displacement and especially interactions of internally displaced persons and the host communities and members of host communities can be viewed from the position of discourse principle and participation. Another methodological, even synthetic field is the visibility aspect of a blind spot. The blind spot is the term itself has some background in biology, of course, because it's an inactive zone in our eye. If I'm not mistaken, it's called discus nervi optici, something like that. So it's a blind spot in our vision we are unaware of. So it's compensated, and we do not feel that we cannot see some part of reality. Of course, the methodology of a blind spot is from system and observation theory by Luhmann and Salim, but I thought it an interesting idea to apply it to visibility of vulnerable groups in, for instance, in the migration context. Um, Also, in the study, I try to refer to imaginative context, explanatory practices, and analysis of institutional frameworks that influence the situation, the migration situation, adaptation, and interaction of populations with and without displacement experience. So if we shift to the philosophical aspect and to the background of territorialization, I suggest to take into account the idea of refrain or ritournelle in the symbolic or territorial aspect. If taken generally, I suggest to view internal displacement in its paradoxic dualism of being a citizen and migrant at the same time without a particular status through the refrain as seen by Deleuze and Guattari in A Thousand Plateaux. And I think, and I suggest to project the vision into three main aspects of migration processes. First of all, escape or migration studies in general. So the next aspect is marked as stability or abode, stability seeking or abode, or generally it's called coordination dynamics of migration. And the philosophical aspect is the appreciation of some place as being a home, a difficult process connected with the ideas of anchoring, unanchoring, and as well as the idea of liquid localness that is actual for now for discussions in social philosophy. I suggest to start with the migration aspect. I hope you can see the key questions there. The main idea of the aspect is the study of adaptation. It's the adaptation of internally displaced person possible and necessary if we speak of interaction between IDPs and members of host communities. First of all, the term of adaptation in the migration context is not homogeneous as well, and it's necessary to state which type of adaptation, which type of integration we mean, and what is more important, we should state the possibility of management of such adaptation. I want to cite one researcher, Sabates Wille, She suggested that every displaced person, every person in the migration context has to make one of the decisions or a succession of decisions. They can be to stay at the place of residence, maybe to move to another place and undergo integration, to integrate into the host community, or to return to the previous place of residence, or to move to some other place of residence. And each choice uh, is connected with a particular displacement specific and displacement intensified needs. And if we say, for instance, if we say um, of Ukraine in this context, we should mention a complicated domicile registration that sometimes makes it impossible to integrate in the host community. Even before the full-scale invasion in 2019, 2020, there was a discussion on the influence or on the impact of this registration on IDPs in the situation of protracted displacement. And two paradoxes should be mentioned in the context. The first one is that sometimes persons after integration, even after successful integration in their communities, uh, mm, they remain in the IDP status and in the newcomer's position. And as I'd like to quote from one of the qualitative studies, one of the respondents mentioned that but for the benefits and the IDP inspections, we could have integrated. So that's a paradox. Another paradox of the registration system is that children who were born in the families of IDPs, they were considered IDPs, and there was a concern before the full-scale invasion that there would be a generation of IDPs without actual displacement, because up to from 2014 and up to 2021, there were children without actual displacement, but IDPs, mentioned as IDPs. Another problem, as you can see from the slide, is that in the cases when return was possible or is possible now it's actual as well, there is a paradox of shuttling or hybrid IDPs, persons who live in their former place of residence and are registered as IDPs in some other territory. For instance, during the first wave of displacement, it had a great impact on statistic data. As you can see, it's twice. So the data differed significantly because it was 800,000 in one. From one point of view, considering shuttling IDPs, and 1.5 million without such calculations. I haven't come across the data about shuttling IDPs in the current situation. but I think the problem of lack of registration or movement between regions is actual as well. So that's the slide on difficulties for counting. And I'd like to suggest you to scan, if you have such a possibility, to scan Mentimeter, and then maybe then I'll show you the results. And it's very interesting for me to discuss your vision on internal displacement. It will be visible as a diagram, and the voting is anonymous. It will show our group vision of the problem. So I hope you have scanned it. I'll show it again at the end of the presentation. Well, the next aspect. The next aspect is on stability. Is on stability during internal displacement. It's called coordination dynamics in equilibrium studies. And I'd like to first of all, I'd like to give some general idea of the processes, and then to show how it works in displacement refrain in Ukraine. So first of all, there can be a non-equilibrium phase pattern. By non-equilibrium, I mean some social or political crisis, or sometimes it can be a natural disaster, but we focus on what triggered displacement. So I mentioned these two causes first of all. So some situations that makes it possible for a person to consider resettlement. And in the situations of lack of stability, non-equilibrium phase, it's quite important for the further decision making of a displaced person. What was the intention to move? It may be some safety reason, it may be some political reason, for instance, lack of desire to live in a pseudo republic, or something else, some personal or even financial causes to move, to resettle. Then another important point that defines adaptation processes is confidence in the decision. For instance, if the decision is connected with safety or political cause, it can be a good reason for a person to seek adaptation to a host community. And as well, success of a trial. We can mention here the idea of the first of primary displacement. If the primary displacement in a host community formed some potential for trust and reliance on the members of the community that were a good start for further adaptation. Then, when we say of instability after resettlement, we can say about the different choices of a displaced person, and we refer to Sabatesvili as well, as I mentioned before. So it can be a multi-stability when a person can choose between integration, return, or maybe quasi displacement. So some considering some secondary displacement in the future, or going abroad. So some multi-stability or bistability when integration or return can be seen as binary position here. Then during the protracted displacement, by the way, by a protracted displacement, we can mean a displacement that lasts for 5 years or longer. There should be considered if a person can return to the previous place of residence. For instance, before these are the causes. I go. For instance, metastability is possible for those internally displaced persons who can return to the former place of residence, even if it has some safety issues. For instance, a person is displaced, internally displaced from Kharkiv, and even despite the safety issues, a person has a hypothetical possibility to return to Kharkiv. If return is impossible, it can be due to the former place of residence being in the occupied territory, in the territory of Pseudo Republic, and or destroyed as it happened during the full-scale invasion. Then return is impossible. It is, and this monostability. So when the only way is to integrate in a host community or undergo secondary displacement and integrate elsewhere, is a quasi-stable state because in fact it's based not only on the intention to integrate, but on the necessity to find some new place to live. And if we go back to Inayatullah, to start a new, to create a new story, to stop the state fight or flight and create a new story. Well, so that's about the systemic causes for the quasi stability. And the diagram here is on liquid localness, and localness refrain or ritournelle, as I mentioned it before. And here I'd like to highlight two parts of the diagram. First of all, it can be a refrain. So it's possible during the internal displacement that the person changes the roles from the newcomer to a local to be a new local, or maybe in cases of disrupted adaptation and return to the former place of residence, it can be a start of a new cycle or of a new adaptation and displacement cycle, a new refrain of integration and sometimes rejection.
Хорошо.
So I'd like to pay your attention pay your attention to the part of the diagram that is called ritournelle mist. So it's some disrupted cycle of adaptation or ritournelle achieved when a person can consider herself or himself a new local and, for instance, to start creating a new story. Well, and now some data, some actual data, as you can see on January 2025. So it's uh, the freshest possible information, it's actual. And at the moment, there is a stable tendency for returnees to prevail over the persons who undergo displacement. So if we go back to the diagram, at the moment, we have a large group of persons who disrupted their adaptation or didn't consider it at all and returned to former place of residence. If we compare the situation with the previous one before the full-scale invasion, it was quite dangerous to become a returnee because it was like a dual uh, alienation. First of all, you experience the failed integration in a host community, but when you return to your place of former residence, for instance, in the occupied territories, you could experience the second cycle of alienation because of your previous pro-Ukrainian choice. It was quite complicated then. Now I'd like to show you some data on the situation that is specific for the phase of full-scale invasion, when some persons shift from being refugees to being displaced persons when they return from abroad. And for instance, they have nowhere to go in Ukraine. Um, Another graph here is um, before the full-scale invasion. It was the investigation of the CEDOS, its Center of Investigations of Society, and I'd like to draw your attention to the cities mentioned here. You may recognize the cities. They are some of them are totally destroyed now. And as you can see from the table, before the full-scale invasion, they had very successful stories of IDP's integration. And it means that in the future and right now we have to deal with a large vulnerable group of people, not only with the experience of a secondary displacement, but with the experience of a secondary displacement after very successful and full integration in some city after the primary displacement. Well, and the last aspect I'd like to share with you is the optics of power. So I suggest to focus on visibility itself. And here I suggest you some context connected with visibility and migration to connect all three topics into one and make some, and a bit later to make some conclusions. First of all, I'd like to mention that in 2019, there was an interesting resolution by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. I think it was a philosophical one because there was one of the paragraphs read like following, as following. Um, uh, in the document on internal displacement, there should be some alterations, and the words registered as IDP should be substituted with the words being IDP. There were discussions at the moment that this substitution makes it impossible to get rid of the status, and it made it impossible to integrate fully in a host community. But now I'd like to go back to the theory, visibility theory, Visibility, as suggested by Andrea Briganti, works instantly, but then can be extended in time. For instance, as I mentioned, this flash halo effect. So, for instance, in 2014, 2015, there was a connection of IDPs in narrative. There was a connection of IDPs and factious regions or pseudo republics. And then it extended in time and it created, sometimes it created super visibility and connection of some procedures, some inspections with safety measures. Then another aspect of visibility is that it marks population. That invisibility invisibility can be not just omitted from agendas, but it can be disempowering in some aspects. As for marked and unmarked population, I'd like to share the theory that connects migration and visibility in some interesting metaphors. Those are the metaphors of witch and phlogiston suggested by Mills in 2017 and cited by Bridget Anderson in 2019. The metaphor in the original context, witch and phlogiston were connected with the image of groups based on some particular characteristic, for instance, race. But in a migration context, we can use them as a visibility metaphor. What is the essence of the metaphor? For instance, phlogiston does not exist, so it's absent from science, and witches do not exist either, but they can be present in some context. If we apply it to IDPs as metaphors, as migrantization metaphors, it works the following way. For instance, IDP status, as I said, is specific. IDPs are not migrants, literally. They are citizens in a migration-specific situation. But sometimes it works like a phlogiston because IDPs are not migrants, and they sometimes they disappear from agendas as having some particular specific or displacement intensified needs. They are mixed with other vulnerable groups. Or it can work as which metaphor. For instance, in media visibility and in visibility in some practical discourses and legislative acts, when IDPs are connected with some issues of safety or some particular modes of life or conduct and so on. And it leads to some negative coding if we refer to system theory about negative and positive coding. It differentiates the group from other groups based on negative coding and generalization. And therefore, it can work as a witch metaphor. But that's the same problem, the problem of visibility. And those are the indicators of anoptisism and panopticism. And I want to go to the blind spot effect uh, as um, as the context of being marked and unmarked population, being referred to as marked or unmarked population. The idea of a blind spot, as you can see, is that the substitution of displacement-specific needs and vulnerabilities with some general ones. For instance, if we consider employment, um, if we consider, for instance, unemployment rate of IDPs can be dissolved and assimilated or simply not seen in the general unemployment rate of the population in some group, but it may have some displacement specific cause. For instance, when IDPs from industrial regions move to some rural host communities, and their unemployment can be connected with the need to, with the impossibility to apply their initial qualification. It can also be referred to housing and to some positive, even to some positive policies like the community-based policy of dual targeting, when people with vulnerabilities should be treated equally in a community despite their situation-specific differences. Well, and now I'd like to show some examples of blind spots. So it can be connected with panopticism or excessive visibility of a group in a community, or anopticism or lack of visibility. And both processes may lead to some negative coding of IDPs in host communities. Well, there is also a problem of shift in representation of IDPs in communities, because in some regions close to the front line, there can be a paradox of majority minority when IDPs form majority in some small communities. And after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, there can be a rapid change in number of IDPs. For instance, I am from Chernivtsi, and the number of IDPs before the full-scale invasion here was about 2,000, and now in 2023 it was 98,000, and now about 75,000 of IDPs. You see that the shifts are quite significant for the city and for the region in general. Here you can see the visibility problem that can be called when wave one effect, because in the reports sometimes the groups of IDPs are not different groups of IDPs are not seen. They are represented as a homogeneous vulnerable group, and as you can see, the situation before the full-scale invasion just is not represented. Also, I hope you can see here that's an example of a blind spot, because as you can see, we have a group here called share of household with vulnerable members, and as you can see, it's April 2022, and among different groups of vulnerable members, children, um, so disabled people. You can see 10% of IDPs, 2014, 2015. I don't know why those years were selected, but as you can see, uh, we have here a paradoxical situation when IDPs within the study of internal displacement within the IDPs are just one of the vulnerable groups. So it's quite interesting, in my opinion. Now, the situation in January 2025 looks as follows. Here we also have some description of vulnerable groups, and within the group of IDPs, there is a vulnerable group of IDPs from the previous wave, 13%. So it can be uh, an example of blind spot as well. Their vulnerability is not shown as displacement specific, but they just get dissolved in general statistics. Well, as for the conclusions, and I call them discussable issues and gaps. Of course, as you can see, some narrative specific problems connected with internal displacement. So it's quite interesting to trace the ways the internal displacement is represented in different reports and even acts, resolutions and strategies. By the way, now we have a state strategy on internal displacement up to 2025. So there will be public discussions on the next strategy, I think, in the nearest time. Also, the problem of return, adaptation, integration, and the possibility of state integration management are those that can be the focus for some further investigations. I'd like to stop my presentation at this point, and I have a suggestion for a discussion topic, but before that, I'd like to hear your questions, your ideas of internal displacement, and I would be very grateful for your commentaries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Svitlana, for your amazing, deep, interesting, and attractive presentation. Let's start our discussion, dialogue. Any questions, comments? Elena, please.
Thank you. Dear Svitlana, thank you very, very much for your interesting presentation. And you mentioned about hybrid or Shetland displacement. And could you please give more details about this phenomenon? Is it a characteristic of the last wave of migration? I mean, internal displacement from February 2022?
Hybrid and Shetland IDPs, it was typical for the first phase, I mean, before the full-scale invasion, when the borderline between the temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, they were called NGCA, non-government controlled areas of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. They were permissible. It was possible to move to the occupied territories and to move to government-controlled territories with some restrictions, but it was physically possible. And at that that time, there was a situation when de facto people lived in the occupied territories. They didn't leave their former place of residence, but they moved several times a week or several times a month during some period. They moved to the government-controlled areas registered as IDPs to get pensions, for instance, to get some benefits and so on. So it led to some distortions in statistic data because sometimes persons who were registered as IDPs were not terminologically IDPs because they did not leave their former place of residence. They shuttled between different territories. And now, if we consider actual situation, you see that the borderline between the government control and non-government controlled areas is in fact now a front line. So there is an armed combat there. So shuttling is not possible anymore. And if we speak of hybrid IDPs or shuttling IDPs in the current situation, we speak of people who, for instance, moved at the beginning of the full-scale invasion and registered as IDPs in some other region of Ukraine, but after the occupation or after some after the safety situation becomes better to some measure, they return to their places for former residence. And by the way, there is an interesting point here. In reports before the full-scale invasion, the first cause for return was mentioned housing. So sometimes people return to their former place of residence despite the dangers, despite some safety situation and biased attitude from the neighbors and so on, because they could not afford housing rent in some other region. And it's interesting that in reports dated 2024 and 23, the first cause for return or shuttling was sentimental cause. So people, and it was unexpected for me because for 10 years I saw housing as the first massive cause for return. And now the first massive cause, about 60% of respondents call sentimental, some sentimental reasons for return to their former place of residence, but I believe that housing may have influence on the situation as well. Mm-hmm. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for our next questions, maybe.
I'd like to show the results. Now, let me see. I can. Well, I suggest to go back to the anonymous voting. Maybe so I could show the results of the voting to all of you. At the moment, I want to describe the results. Now, at the moment, 100% voted for return as the best option for internal displacement. like to show it to you. If you voted, it would just add to the diagram. By the way, another problem that was discussed on this displacement is equality. After Ronald Dworkin, the difference between equal treatment and the treatment as an equal. So when we speak not only of distribution of benefits and burdens, but of initial um, some initial respect. And if we go back to the metaphors of witch and phlogiston, so maybe to disruption of the connection between some negative coding of regions and the IDPs who moved to some other regions of the country. Well,
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions, comments? And mhm.
Hi, sorry, I don't know how to raise the hand. Thank you so much, Svitlana, for your presentation. It's really rich and interesting. I have a question specifically about your choice of using Deleuzian terminology as your theoretical framework, because um, I can see immediately a couple of problems, and I'm speaking as a convinced Deleuzian who actually works with Deleuze as well. But in this case, for example, the theory of territorializing can be used to describe the invading force as well, because it's also a process of signs of taking territory, of appropriating, of it's a continuous process. So I see a problem perhaps with the generality of the Deleuzian framework when we are speaking about internal displacement. So I just wanted to know more about why you found this useful.
well, I I used it on the maybe as a metaphor of the refrain, and I liked the another Deleuzian position that was not shown here, that territory uh, can be described as a succession of rhythms. And I think that internal displacement maybe on some symbolic level is the rhythm or refrain of localness. Therefore, I use liquid localness because it's, for instance, um, it's impossible to require integration, because integration is a deep internal process of unanchoring from some former place of residence, for instance, and anchoring to some other place of residence, or embedding into some new social space, and so on. And I think the displacement can be described as a rhythm of adaptation, maybe misadaptation, rejection, search, escape, abode, and home again and again. So the rhythmical, refrainal, I don't know the correct word, refrain-like rhythm of displacement seems to me quite appropriate in this context. Have
Yeah, just a follow-up question. Would you maybe use the same terminology to describe the population that is, for example, right now moving into the newly built neighborhoods in Mariupol, the new buildings that the occupiers are building there, and moving population? Could we talk about them in the same terms? And what I'm getting at is that how are we able to theoretically describe the people who are violently removed? I mean, there is a violence in moving this population to Mariupol as well, but it's not the same kind of violence as a population that is forced to migrate, the Ukrainian population that is internally displaced. So my problem with this framework, and again, I'm speaking as a Deleuzian who's trying to make sense of this, is that these are Deleuzian terminology lacks an internal ethic, and I wonder how we can use it and how we can combine it to better describe a situation like this, because the territorializing and ritournelle are very good terms as well to use.
Maybe no, it's not a methodological remark now, rather personal remark. Maybe I mirrored some state that was familiar for me during my experience of occupation and escape as well. I escaped in 2014 from Donetsk region after several months of occupation. And for me, the situation describes the rhythm of something chaotic when when internally you understand that any decision is possible now. The decision to stay, to move, or to do anything is possible. So the state of anything is possible. And when you start structuring your intention, it forms some particular rhythm as maybe separating from this part of life or home and so on, and seeking for some other unknown, even unknown, and also chaotic cluster of events, places, and even people. So maybe it
Okay,
was
thank
like
you so
that.
much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for this discussion. Christoph, please, your remark, questions.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I've only some empirical questions regarding perhaps further information. If you would give them, I would be interested in. For instance, the reasons for internal migration. Internal migration confronted or compared with staying there where one lives, the bad situation notwithstanding, or my external migration. So what are the reasons why people go or move to internal migration and not to external or staying there? Another question would be, what is the situation of the IDPs? Are they integrated? How much are they integrated in the labor market? How do their families work? Things like that. Can you please say something about two questions? Thank you.
Oh, well, I hope I have understood it correctly. Well, just a question for me to understand correctly the question. Do you mean the connection between migration and the experience, or what? Maybe I have not understood the question.
No, the point was, the first question was internal migration, which leads in the end to being an IDP, yeah, as confronted with external migration, that is going to some foreign country and or staying at home.
So
What are
being a refugee, you mean, yeah?
Yes, being a refugee. So what you choose is not, yeah, okay. What are the reasons why people do that in confrontation with the other two possibilities? And the other question was, the second questions regarded situation of the IDPs. How are they integrated in the labor market, for instance? How do their family works, and what's their housing situation? Things like that. If you could say something about that.
Well, so if we speak of the actual situation now during the full-scale invasion. This statistic data suggest that sometimes being a refugee or an IDP is a choice in the situation when return or adaptation is not an option. For instance, I showed the data when for a person their position is not return or adaptation, but being a refugee abroad, for instance, or being a displaced person in Ukraine, but sometimes it's impossible to return to the former place of residence at all. But as for the data on employment, housing, and so on, I think I'll well. I think I have no now at the moment access to 2025 data, but as for the previous year, there was a high level of migration of unemployment connected with the structure of households, because mostly about 70% of households with of a single-membered household are women, and therefore their employment in their place of displacement in the host communities is connected with some additional burdens. For instance, if they are single mothers, or if they are of some particular age. And last year, I came across statistics of 50% of unemployed IDPs. And I think in some, to some measure, the high percent, this high percent reflects the situation of the regional situation of qualifications that cannot be applied to the opportunities that could be suggested, for example, in the Western Ukraine, where industrial development differs from that of Dnipro, for instance, or Kharkiv. And as for the current situation with the IDPs, we see that the paradoxical aspect is that there are a lot of returns to the previous place of residence, despite the safety issues and employment issues and even housing issues. Sometimes I think it can really have that sentimental aspect that was mentioned in most statistical data as the reason for return, because some actual economic reasons sometimes cannot be seen in this huge statistic of returns during the war. But I think that I can share the data, the information in the chat, not to cite it freely. Let me see. There is a link, and the last block of information there contains some reports and statistic data and some actual information on displacement in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. But may I come back for a moment still to the first question? I think I didn't make it quite clear. So no, the question was what you spoke about the people who return, but I asked for the people for the first decision in the first place where to go. You said they cannot. Sometimes they cannot return. Okay, but that's not a reason why to go abroad or why to being an IDP, that is, remain in Ukraine.
Why to go abroad?
Why? Yeah, so the difference would be there are various options if you cannot stay where you live, and you have at least these two big options. And the question was, why choose people the first or the second option?
Well, I cannot refer to intentions of people, but I think of the data. If I come across any qualitative studies with interviews where people describe their intentions of the kind. But as for me, the status, maybe it's a suggestion. I think that being a citizen and migrant at the same time causes some delayed life effect for IDPs. So it's impossible to make a borderline between the temporary and permanent situation of displacement. And for me, it's my suggestion only. I think that for migrants, for refugees for those who go abroad, the situation is more defined. It's my suggestion, because the status is more clear, and it's my suggestion as well. The temporality of the status is more clear when being a refugee. And my suggestion is that it might be one of the reasons of the choice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you, Katerina, please.
Yes. Thank you so much, Svitlana, for your very deep and very interesting topical question. As for vulnerable groups of internal displacement persons, it's okay. I'm absolutely agree with you. All conclusions are very, very clear and logical. As for me, I'm interested in question on business, people who are also became internal replacement persons, and they are not vulnerable, they are not invisible. Even, for example, the phenomenon of our Poltava, when the domestic business very often are suffering from internal displaced people, and also the same situation maybe in Chernivtsi, but in another way. But I would like ask you, maybe you told in your research about decision making, and vulnerability as for you comes from this situation, but even business, and especially as for the criminal business, it is very difficult. Maybe it is phlogiston phenomena, yeah, because they maybe do not obviously, but they influence the business in new space. As for legal business, For example, in Kharkiv and in Poltava, we have got some discrepancy because as for the internal business in Kharkiv, we have problem because a lot of people changed the place to Poltava, and they improved the situation in Poltava, but it became more weak, a little bit weaker in Kharkiv. My question is it common conclusion that displacement is always vulnerable situation? Maybe for some people, for some group of business, this situation became positive even. Maybe extraordinary situation it is, but maybe. I'm not specialist in this sphere, but I see this situation in two Ukrainian cities, Kharkiv and Poltava. And there is a contradiction. And very often internal displacement people, persons, they are not vulnerable. What do you think about this as a specialist?
Interesting aspect. I haven't. I haven't considered the aspect in my study, but I have.
Yeah, your research gives a lot of very important decisions and maybe directions how to overcome this, to be a blind spot or something else. It's okay. It's very, very good, positive. But there is another aspect. Okay, I understood that it was not the
yes, it's beyond the scope of this study, but I think that it might be close to the aspect of I mean that I mentioned on equal treatment and treatment as an equal. So when if we speak of benefits and burdens distributions in this context, maybe we can connect it to this aspect as well. Well, but it might be an interesting aspect for some further study of the problem, not as a problem.
Yeah, thank you. I thought about the same when I had that burden and preferences. Yeah, in this context could be discovered in new aspects. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. And I should also mention that it's the discussion of narratives on IDPs. It was even before the full-scale invasion. For instance, in 2019, as I remember, there was a discussion on one of the strategies point on internal displacement, and the strategy was the key point of the discussion was not to consider internal displacement as a problem, but as an opportunity connected with some development of region, social capital, and so on. And there was a very detailed remark of one of the departments of the Academy of Science that was against using the word burden and problem connected with internal displacement in the document, in the official document. But alas, the remark, I traced the remark up to the final version of the strategy, but it was rejected in 2019. Alas. And in 2023, when this current strategy on internal displacement was formed and discussed, the word problem, displacement as problem is still there in the strategy, but it's interesting that in the English version of the strategy, the word problem is substituted in this latest version with for me a mild term of issue. It's not called problem in the an English version, but that's an interesting discussion connected with the narrative describing displacement as and coding displacement as something positive or something negative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are so many aspects of this problem. Yeah, we are open now. Maybe somebody else. I would like, in this case, I would like to give some remarks and questions. You mentioned French postmodernist theoretics as your theoretical framework. After that, Anda discussed with you this, and I would like to add other optics of another French postmodernist thinker, Derrida, about hospitality. His proposition about hospitality, his works, his idea of absolute radical hospitality, and recur linguistic hospitality. This discourse of hospitality was supported by very interesting Ukrainian philosopher and theologian Roman Solovey. He is from Lviv and at the same time from Dragomanov Pedagogical University. And what do you think? Is it possible to combine these two types discourse of hospitality, migration? For example, maybe it's possible from point of view of theory of or discourse of hospitality, propose different types of the guest, stranger, enemy, alien. Maybe it's one of the remark in the for the Katerina, how we can divide this new guest in another territory. And for example, one of the point of view of Derrida in his work about absolute or radical hospitality without any condition, to be open to any some possibility to practice hospitality, that hospitality is impossible without openness, vulnerability, and risk. What some remarks can you maybe can you add or to adapt this French intellectual proposition to your theoretical framework from the French too?
Thank you very much. I haven't considered Derrida. By the way, I have already noted that it should be added. I'll see it.
It can be. Excuse me, I just maybe the one of the questions at the time of our discussion was about ethics, as I understand, ethical dimension, and maybe this hospitality is more ethical than space, than something territory, local space. I'm stop.
Yes, and in social philosophy, well, for instance, there is an aspect that might be quite close to that, the aspect of trust in a community, trust and reliability in a community, and it's even an obligatory indicator in most population surveys on internal displacement. And also one more indicator that can be seen in this context is not in my backyard, not in my backyard. So otherness indicator and it's quite sad that in 2019, among the groups of people not in my backyard, so in the national population survey, there were IDPs on the 5th or 6th position as well. So therefore, I think that the questions of alienation, otherness, and adaptation, trust, reliance can be seen from the point of hospitality as well. Thank you very much. It's quite interesting. I haven't
Do you
considered.
remember Lars von Trier Dogville? We can look on this movie from point of view of this differences or transition of the attitude from the openness and maybe trust or absolute hospitality to the absolute violence and control. Do you remember? And it after the tragedy.
Or ignoring that can be considered a sort of violence in some situations as well.
Thank you so much. There are many new visions I will open for myself after your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions, more points of view, remarks, opposition? Thank you so much. You devoted your evening or morning or your time at the last day of the January for our discussion. Thank you so much, and please remember the next date of our seminar, 27th of February. I will write you about topic and our new speaker from United States, our participants, Margaret Konza, professor of Long Island University, Paradox of Law in Analytical Philosophy Perspectives. Maybe, thank you so much, Svitlana. Maybe somebody amazing presentation. We keep in our mind your topic, your openness, and I suppose all of your ideas we will adapt to our imagination, discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon. Have a nice day. You know, maybe just now it was explosion in Odessa at the time of our seminar. But do you see, we are ready. We have a resilience for some kind of events, and be safe, be peaceful, and have a nice day, evening, year, and time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
You have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.